Thank you. Good morning. My name is Bea, and I'm an alcoholic. And I go around the country taking inventory on conventions. And this rate's real high. I'm very excited because this is the first one you've had, and I'm just feel so privileged that Bud invited me to participate and be part of this. This has been marvelous for me. And I often say this when I do the Sunday morning meeting: if God were to appear to me, and I don't know why she doesn't, I say that especially for some real special friends that I have here. And were to say to me, Bea, we've been thinking your case over, and we've decided now that it's okay. You don't have to be an alcoholic at all, and you don't have to belong to AA, and it's okay. I would say, no, thank you, Father, because that's who my God is. No, thank you, Father, because this is just fine with me. This is wonderful. I have found a way through this blessed program to fit in my own skin. Now, some of you who are new might not think that that's real important, but those of us who have never fitted in our own skin feel that that's really important. And what by the way, when I do this at conventions, I usually have to catch an airplane. And today my car's in the parking lot, so I've all day. So relax and take it easy and don't struggle. I can't assure you that the right answers will come. But anyway, I'm so grateful to God that I got the opportunity to be here. But what I come usually and say is that everything in my life was wonderful until I was 2. And when I was 2, something terrible happened, and it never dawned on me that I would be in a marvelous place like this telling all you people what happened to me when I was 2. And incidentally, in case I forget to say this, I'm so grateful and so delighted to meet so many people that I've known for a long time. In fact, I know several people in this room who've known me since day one, but they're under the seal of confession and secrecy, and they can't tell anybody anything about what it was like for me for the first year. I also have a few wonderful friends here from my Pomona meeting, and I have some marvelous friends over here who drove all the way from Orange County this morning. In particular, I want to tell you about my friend Chris. I love Chris. He's just marvelous. He almost has 30 days. Let's give him another hand, because he's my friend. I know this is probably breaking all your traditions, but I'm just so touched by the fact that he drove here all the way this morning with Jan and the others. It's encouraging to me to know that this program works like this. And I'm also convinced that, and I'm so grateful to know this, that nothing that I say today can be of real importance necessarily, because I have long since understood that I'm not a victim of the delusion that I can rest, satisfaction, and happiness if only I manage well. Because, you see, I know that God works here today through the energy and the love in this room, through all of the people who have put this together and the way it works. Through the people who make the coffee and set up the chairs and do the readings. And I just know that it works that way. So it's the energy of love in this room that makes it go. It's fantastic. But when I was 2, anyhow, my sister was born. Now, if you're Irish and you have freckles and red hair and your little sister is born and she moves into this world as the epitome of perfection, which I didn't think I was. I found out afterwards I was. But she moved in here to the world, and my parents did something that others have done to me since that time, and that is that they didn't ask my permission. Now, I'm sure that there may be 1 or 2 of you in this room where the world doesn't ask your permission. You know how they turn on the traffic lights to red when you're coming along, and they put trains on the track when you're coming along. People generally don't ask my permission. I haven't figured out why yet, but I'm working on this. And anyway, what they did, the parents I had, they adored her at her crib. And they seemed to give her an awful lot more attention and admiration than I felt they had given me. Now, I was very interested to hear Keith talking again last night about what he had written on his mirror that said, Keith, you're wrong. And I'm here to tell you that my story is kind of similar to Keith's, only that it's not as exciting. It's kind of boring, as a matter of fact. So just stay where you are and enjoy yourselves. Well, the parents I had kept on having babies. They were Irish and Catholic, and they kept on having babies every year. And when it arrived at the end of the babies they had, there were 5 of us, and I was the oldest of 5. And every time they had a new child, it seemed like that I was being kind of pushed out of where I knew I belonged. And where I knew I belonged is written about on page 62 of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. You might want to read that, Bill, if you want to get that new book you got today. My story is on page 62 because it says that selfishness and self-centeredness is the root of our problem. Now, I don't like that particularly, but that's what the big book says. The big book hurts my feelings quite a bit. And see, when I felt these people pushing me out of where I felt I belonged, which was the center. And when I got to be the ripe age of 8 years of age, my father went to work one day, and he never came home because he was killed in an accident. Now, I happened to like my father, and he was lucky because I didn't like that many people in the whole world. And he died, and I didn't know how to do death or dying or mourning or grief or any of the things that we learn how to do today. And I was this little 8-year-old, and I was just devastated, and I didn't know what it was called. I didn't even know until I got into Alcoholics Anonymous what that was all called and what that was all about. And I can always recall exactly what my mom did on the day of my dad's funeral. She took me aside and she said, "Bea, I want you to help me to raise these children." My mom was projecting her own loss on top of me because I was the oldest of the 5 children, and she was a school teacher, eventually to become a school principal, and she wanted us all to become educated. That was her big goal in life because she knew most of us would be widowed by the time we were 32 like she was. And so she asked me if I would help her to raise the rest of the family. And I would love to tell you that I drove from Orange County and that I grew up that day, but I haven't done so yet. I'm working on this thing called growing up. It's taking me a long time. But what I did as a sort of an external sign that I was growing up was I put away my dolls and all my playthings and all the things I did as a little girl of 8. And I put them away, and I started to learn how to do what grown-ups do. And in my case, I learned how to clean and cook and babysit and help my mother with all the school teachery kinds of things that she had to do for her schooling. And when I got to be in my teenage years, like most of us do, I started to think about what I would like to do with the rest of my life. And so what I decided to do was something really big and something really spectacular. I decided to become a saint. Now, I told you the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous hurts my feelings sometimes. And what it says in the book is that we're not saints. I was really put out when I heard that, you know, a long time ago in the program. I heard them say that we're not saints, we're trying to grow along spiritual lines and we're striving for progress, not perfection. And I thought you were supposed to do perfection. I mean, really thought you were supposed to do perfection. And so what I decided to do in order to become a saint was the best I knew to do then, which was to become a Catholic nun. Now, I've been doing this nunny business for 39 years now, and there might be 1 or 2 of you in this big audience who have had a problem with people like me. I notice that as I go around Alcoholics Anonymous, there are some recovering Catholics too. And what I'm here to tell you is that if people like me did anything to you, I want to assure you that I didn't do it to you, okay? So once we get that sort of ascertained at the beginning, it makes it really easy for me. Because when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I just assumed the responsibility and the guilt of the entire Catholic Church. And what I'm here to tell you, and please don't tell Deke or Marianne, but because I say this sometimes and they're my sponsors, what I've discovered is that there are assholes every place. You know what I mean? There are a few Lutheran assholes and Baptist assholes and Methodist assholes and Jewish assholes, and I found 1 or 2 assholes in Alcoholics Anonymous, just a few. But so So we move on, to try to sort out what's important about the program. And anyway, I went into this nunny business with the best of intentions, and they were glad to get me because I could do things, and they thought I was kind of smart, and they said they'd send me to school, and they sent me to school in England. And if you're a little Irish girl from the north of Ireland where everybody fights, and they say no surrender is the graffiti on their walls, and you come to AA and they say, B, the only thing that's going to work for you is if you surrender. God, it's so funny. And so they sent me to England to learn how to grow up and be educated, and I went to the University of London, and I was very successful. And I thought, well, I'll teach the English people how to do life because they don't know how to do life. And so I was teaching in a school in England, and mind you, I haven't had a drink yet, and for a long time I haven't had a drink, so sit tight now. And but what I want to let you know is that I was really happy teaching this little group of kids in the northeast corner of England, except for one thing, and that was that in my head would go off on a regular basis a little voice. Now, looking at your beautiful shining faces, I just don't think any of you ever heard this voice, but since I have to be honest, I have to tell you about the voice that would go off in my head. And it was like a continuous voice, and it would get like a mantra, keep repeating itself, and it went like this, somewhat like this. If only they would shape up, I would feel better. If only they would shape up, I'd feel better. Louder and louder and louder and louder and louder. And I just knew that if only I could get them to shape up, I'd feel better. Now, that's a very subtle voice, because that voice can move in today if I'm not real careful. I've been taught how not to let that voice in, but it moves in. So that voice got louder and louder and louder. And what happened was, one day I came home from school. I'd been teaching all day, and on the bulletin board of our convent there was a notice, and the notice said, would any of you sisters like to volunteer to go to California? If you want to, you can sign up and go. And well, of course I knew they were all waiting for me in California. You know how important we are. And I knew that in Los Angeles airport that you'd all be waiting for me with the red carpet extended, and you needed me to teach you how to teach your kids and how to teach you to be parents and all of this stuff. So I signed up and I got picked, and they sent me to California. And before I left, my superiors had wonderful taste. I always think my superiors were marvelous. They said, you're in charge. Now, I was in charge from the time my father died, remember? So I had great practice of being in charge, and so I was in charge. And they told me they were putting me in charge of the school. They were putting me in charge of all the nunny bunnies that were running around there too. And so here I was. And I was in charge, and I just knew that I was going to be grand in California. And we were wearing all those nunny clothes. If you've ever seen anybody like us, with the long, Keith was talking about his friend Sister Victoria last night, and I was dressed like Sister Victoria with the big rosary beads down here, and the long black serge clothes, and the white starch in my ears, and I couldn't see anything, and they couldn't see me, and all you could see were my two hands. And on the 16th of August, 1964, what I do remember when I arrived in Los Angeles, it was hot, very hot. And we were just moving into this new school, and I thought, this is going to be grand. And everything in California was wonderful for 5 days. And after 5 days, I was to meet a man who was to become my archenemy for many years afterwards, and he was known as the pastor. You probably don't know what that means, but he was the man with whom I was to work, for the rest of my life, it seemed like. And the interesting thing about it was, he thought he knew everything, and I knew that I knew everything, see. And immediately, the two of us locked horns. We just immediately. And I knew that there's some way I had to get rid of this man. And the voice would go again, if only he'd shape up, I'd feel better. If only he'd shape up, I'd feel better. It's real hard. And I didn't like him. God, I hated him. He did weird things, like he had just built this beautiful school and this beautiful place for us to live. And I don't know if any of you know your history, but he painted the doors of the school orange, and I come from the north of Ireland, and that's real terrible to do something like that. God, he just didn't know any better. He had no sensitivity towards somebody like me. And he was real bossy, and I was real bossy, and I was just awful, and I didn't like this. And I was trying to get these nunnies that I worked with to fight him, and they wouldn't fight him because they were nice, and I wanted to fight him nice, and oh, it was hard. One day I was in my office just leaving the school for the day, and this lady knocked at my door. And she invited me to bring all the sisters over to swim in their swimming pool for the evening. And we were experiencing at that time a Santa Ana wind, and it was hot, and gosh, I thought this would be great. We'll get into our swimsuits, we'll go and swim, and that'll be grand. And we did that, and we all piled into the station wagon. I don't know if any of you know, but nuns always used to have station wagons. You know, we all piled these nuns into the station wagon, and we went over to her swimming pool. I know there are some nuns in this audience who appreciate this. And we got in there, and we swam, and we had a lovely time, and we were all through. She came out to the side of the pool with this tray and a large pitcher and some glasses. And on the top of the glasses there was salt. Well, wonderful people you are. So, I mean that because, you know, I tell this story in England, and when I tell them that, they go, "Nah," goes right over their heads. They never had a margarita. I question anybody's sobriety who has not had margaritas. Mexico is my favorite country. Margaritas was my favorite drink. And so I would love to tell you I took a sip, but I never sipped. I slugged and I guzzled. And I took a few things out of this, and I thought, oh my God, this is marvelous. You know, where have I been all this time? What? Is this real in the world? You know, you can do this? Great stuff. And it went right down to my toenails, and I just thought, oh, my little sister that I had resented, my mom that I didn't do too well either, and all the people in my life who were not shaping up seemed to be shaping up right there. And especially this pastor. Oh, God, he seemed wonderful from that distance. I thought, oh, great. And I said to the lady, could you give us the recipe? And so she gave me the recipe, and I took this home to the convent, and the pastor came over one day to visit us, and he said, is there anything you need? And he always used to say that with his tongue in his cheek, because that meant that I would ask him for new furniture, big things, because I thought things would fix me, or us. And I said, well, as a matter of fact, yes, we would like to have a bottle of tequila. And he said, oh, you like that stuff? And I said, well, yes, we do. We like that stuff, and, you know, every once in a while we could have this stuff here. And so he went out, and he I think he went to where tequila was manufactured, which was his house, and he brought it back to me, and he said, would you like this? Would you like to come over and visit with us next Sunday? We're having a little barbecue here. And he said, we're having some steaks and some glass of wine. And I thought, oh, God, it's wonderful. We went over there on the Sunday evening, and I will never forget it. It was a fantastic awakening. Talk about a spiritual awakening. Well, there I knew that there was something called scotch and gin and vodka and bourbon and margaritas, and they had wine, and after that they even had after-dinner drinks. And I thought, oh, I've got to get friends with this man. I'll get friends with this man. In fact, the book talks about it when it says, sometimes we seek lower companions. This man that I'm talking about knows I said this. He's heard my tape, and he usually comes to my birthday. Some of you know who he is. Anyway, I sought these lower companions, and I knew then that if I could just stay around, I was beginning to get really interested in what this stuff did for me. Now, for your interest, and this is not really a big deal at all, but for your interest, at that time in the church that I belonged to, there was a movement happening, and it was called Vatican II. And it meant that, like the Pope had said, oh, come on, let's get a bit of fresh air into this church. It's too stuffy. Let's get a little bit more human. Let's, find out what's really going on in our hearts. Let's just take those big nunny clothes off and get into regular clothes, and let's go out among the people. Well, what I thought Pope John the 23rd meant was, I thought he meant you could just drink. I didn't know it meant you had to look at your heart. I knew that this meant just get a little bit more relaxed. And so I involved myself with all kinds of places like the Cursillo movement, all kinds of prayer group movements, where I knew that you could get alcohol at the end of all of that, because that was becoming very interesting to me. And what was most interesting to me was that at the same time there was an awful lot of pain happening inside of me. There were pains of loneliness and of being orphaned and being afraid and being separate and being resentful especially about the church to which I belonged. And what I found was that the alcohol somehow got me down, just took me down enough, where I was mellowed out and in a sort of an even keel. And I did lots of things. During that time, it was interesting, the kinds of ways I had to procure my alcohol. We don't grow it in the convent or anything like that. It's just hard to get it sometimes. And the sorts of ways I used to get it, I had to depend on the good faith of my friends whose kids I taught, and at Christmas they would get very generous. And as they got to know about my drinking, they got more and more generous. There was one lady one time, and she came in and she said her husband had brought us a case of wine from the Napa Valley. And I thought, oh, wasn't that wonderful? What a good man. We prayed for him. We all prayed for him. We pray for our benefactors, right? God. And there's this other wonderful man, and he had a trailer down in Estero Beach in Ensenada. Some of you might have been there. Don't know where you were when I was drinking, if you were, but I wish I'd met you. And anyway, he said to me, we have this little trailer, and you can use that anytime we're not there. And I always remember the day he gave me the keys, and he said, this is the key of the front door, this is the key of the cabana, and this is the key of the liquor cabinet. Help yourself. And I said, praise God from whom all blessings flow. And I meant it. Because I knew as soon as I could get the opportunity, I was in that car in that station wagon driving all those nunny bunnies out through the border so that we get this stuff that was in his liquor cabinet. See, I never drank on the job. I knew better than to do that. I never drank and drove. See, my story's real boring. But then I started, Flo always makes me tell this, but I'll tell you anyhow, I forget to do it. One time they sent me to Australia to fix up Australia. The nuns were always sending me to fix up places. And Australia's a real dry country if you're like I was then, dying for a drink. And so I fixed up Australia, and the gal in charge of the whole thing I was doing, she said to me, is there anything you need? And I said, well, as a matter of fact, I would like a drink. And she gave me a glass of pop. And I said, that's not exactly what I had in mind. And she went to the medicine cabinet of the convent where I was staying, and she brought out this bottle of whiskey, which was at least 100 years old. I think she had given it to the nuns for the flu for the last 100 years before that, and she gave it to me to help myself. And I still believe to this day, she even told me that this year when I was in Australia, she hoped that I would give it back to her, but she never saw it again. It was about 3/4 filled. I had to do all kinds of funny things to get my booze, and it was very hard. And I look at people like you, and I look at people around me here, and I know you would all have bought me drinks, wouldn't you? Right, you would have. But it was hard. And I started to get real uncomfortable about the way I felt. And the way I felt was, I felt like, I think it's Dr. Bern Johnson talks about people like us who says we're like a walking civil war. There's one side of us who has a value system, and we don't want to do this. And then the other side of us no longer has the freedom to choose. We can't not drink or use. We can't not do that. And God knows I didn't want to drink. I didn't want to drink. I didn't want to wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning pacing the convent and knowing that if I could find any, which was questionable, but if I could find any, that you couldn't drink at nighttime like that, because if you did, you'd be an alcoholic. God forbid. Wouldn't that be awful? And I did what some of you might have done. I don't know if any of you were as angry as I was. I never had anger. I had the 4-letter word for anger, which is rage. And I got very angry, and I got very angry especially with God. I don't tell this too often either, but one of the things that I did, I can always remember going down to our little chapel in the middle of the night, trying to get this obsession, this dreadful craving, the phenomenon of craving that the book talks about, removed from me. Mind you, I didn't want to give up drinking. I just wanted to learn the methodology of how to do this right. Control and enjoy and control, those two things, you can't do, the book says. But anyhow, I remember going down to the chapel and giving God the finger. Don't be shocked now if you're new. Just hang around. Those kinds of things used to shock me, but I used to do things like that. I was very upset with God. Very upset. And then I thought, well, maybe what I should do is do it God's way. Maybe I should learn how to pray more. Maybe I should learn more about spirituality. And maybe I should go and learn all this stuff about theology and spirituality and learn how to teach people how to pray and do all that stuff. And maybe then I'll learn the combination and I won't be thinking about alcohol all the time. That was my best friend. But I wouldn't tell anybody that. You see, we don't tell our secrets. And so I went up to the northern part of California to make a 30-day retreat. And God, it was a terrible time. Couldn't get any booze, except on the day that we had our break day, which was day 15. And they said to me, is there anything special you'd like to do since you're in the north of California? And I said, yes, I would like to visit the Napa Valley. And I spent the day doing the wineries in the Napa Valley and coming back and feeling no pain and knowing that on day 30 I was going to wake up and that I'd have this thing down when I knew that I wouldn't be thinking about alcohol all the time. And it's always interesting to me because I see a variety of people here. Some of you are my dear, dear friends, and some of you I've never met before. On the other hand, I also know that if I were to start on my right here and go all around this room and end up here with Ed and say to you, how did you die? How did you die? Some of you may have died physically almost, and some of you have definitely died in your spirit. And I can tell by the look in your eyes and by your faces. And you would all be telling me a variety of ways in which you died the moment you came to. Some of you might have been in an institution, some of you might have been in a hospital, some of you might have been in your kitchen. I don't know where you were. But I'm here to tell you that I died in a very wonderful, sheltered environment. And I was living with very wonderful people. People who are kind, people who are prayerful, and people who love me. And I was standing alone in this wonderful environment called a convent, dying alone. And this disease is so built, the denial that's built into this disease is so rampant, and we really don't know that it's so rampant, that we don't know that we're dying. And I didn't know anybody in this wide earthly world. God, I was thinking about this morning. Davida, where were you, sweetheart? I was thinking about this. Davida and I could have had a ball drinking. We could have. Where I just had nobody that I knew that I could have told. Nobody. And I didn't know what to do. And one day I was standing in our living room, and I just happened to pick up this little booklet. It was called Sisters Today, that little thing that's put out for nuns alone. And on the back page there was an ad, and it said, "Sister, are you concerned about your drinking? If so, please call this number, collect." And that was a miracle, because I knew there were about 140,000 nuns in the United States, but I didn't know that anybody else had a problem with drinking. See, some of us have other problems besides drinking. We have terminal uniqueness. That's a problem too. And arrogance. That's a North of Ireland problem. You don't have that, but I do, this arrogance thing. Well, that's because your forebears came from there. But anyhow, I called this number, which happened to be Massachusetts. And I talked to this lady, and I don't know if any of you ever did this, but it was necessary for me to tell her a lot of lies because I couldn't tell the truth. And I told her that I was really concerned because I was now moving jobs, and that part was true. And I was moving into this new job that I have today, which was a very executive type job in the church, and I was in administration. And a lot of the people with whom I would be working were drinking. And I told her this, and I told her I didn't know how to handle these drinkers that I was going to be working with. And she went on listening, and she told me about the books and the literature. She would send me some literature, and she told me about recovery hospitals, and she told me about Alcoholics Anonymous, and she just, And then she said a most extraordinary thing. She said, "Sister, would you like to share with me a little bit about your own drinking?" I have tremendous respect for the people in Massachusetts because I don't know how they know these things over the telephone. And she said a most marvelous sentence to me that I will never, ever forget. And by the grace of God and this program, I'm able to say this sentence today myself. And she said to me, "I can hear pain in your voice." And by the grace of this program, because we've died, we can get the grace to hear one another's pain. And when we hear one another's pain, we can heal one another. Isn't that wonderful? And so she heard the pain in my voice. And when she said that, I was able to break down over the phone, and I was able to cry into this telephone, to this voice, whom I'd never seen the face. And I was able to tell her that I didn't know where to go, I didn't know who to ask, I didn't know what to do, but I was very concerned about my drinking. And so she advised me to go to some Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. Well, now I knew I could never do that, because if I did, I would meet somebody I knew. And I was real important in those days, I have to tell you. I was well known, and I thought, boy, you know, I might meet a kid I taught, or a mom or a dad of a kid I taught. Oh, God, can you imagine what that felt like? And anyway, I told her that I would think it over, and the next day I called an AA club in a place called Whittier. And some of you are here from Whittier and know what I'm talking about. It's Serenity Hall in Whittier. It used to be on Greenleaf Avenue. And so I called Serenity Hall on a Wednesday morning, and I went there at 10 a.m. I will never forget my first AA meeting, never as long as I live. I remember at the time we were wearing a kind of a modified nunny habit. And I changed from my nunny clothes into regular clothes, and I put on a whole bunch of eye makeup to go to Serenity Hall in Whittier. I wanted to impress them. And I went in there, and the guy who was leading the meeting said that he would sign court cards after the meeting. And I didn't know what he meant, so I thought I'd have to go out and get a court card so that I could be kept in the place. And it was a strange little place, Serenity Hall. I do believe it has been affected by the earthquake, but they do have Serenity Hall still. And there was a lot of smoke, and it just seemed like real strange for me to be there. And this man was at the podium that they had in Serenity Hall, and he was sharing his experience, strength, and hope. And what he was doing was, he was using words that I used to punish the 8th graders for writing on the bathroom walls. Like, he was using a word that starts with sh. And he was just, you know, every minute he would say the sh word, you know. And then eventually he graduated into another one that started with f. I know you don't know what that one is, but in Whittier they know what that one is. Now, what fascinated me the most was that he was able to use these words in sentences. And not only that, but he was able to use the f word in all kinds of different parts of speech, like verbs, adverbs, adjectives, prepositions, conjunctions. He could use the f word with ed on the end of it and ing on the end of it too. The f word was a bad word in my vocabulary because, well, in fact, it wasn't in my vocabulary then, but the little first graders used to come to my office sometimes, and they'd say, "Sister, bend over," and I used to have to bend over, and they'd say, "Big Tommy in the 8th grade said the f word." Well, that was bad stuff, and this man was just using, you know. I thought, oh my God, and this is going to be my spiritual leader for the rest of my life. I didn't know how I was going to do this, folks, I'll tell you, I didn't know. And then at the end of the meeting, we all stood in a circle like we do, and we said the Our Father, and then they said, "And keep coming back, it works." And I thought, oh my God, what am I going to do? And so I got into my car, and God, I didn't want to be an alcoholic. If there's anybody here, some of you new people, you probably don't want to be alcoholics. Oh God, I love you so much because I know what that pain feels like. I really do. I do. And I got into my car and I was crying hard. Oh God, I was crying so hard. And I looked at myself in the rearview mirror, and this green stuff that I'd put in my face was all, ladies know, you know what I mean, don't you? And it was going down my face, and I was a sorry sight, and I looked at myself, and I thought, oh my God. And I said the shit word and the f word all the way home. Oh, just keep that in the family, won't you now? And you know what? Sometimes there's no substitutes, however. I'm not here that. You know, there are some of you who go to Alcoholics Anonymous, and the first time you walk in there, you know you're home. And I love you, and I think you're wonderful, and I wish it had been like that for me. But it wasn't like that for me. I didn't like Alcoholics Anonymous for a long time, and since my sponsors and the people who love me enough to be honest with me tell me I have to share it like it was for me, I hated Alcoholics Anonymous. I mean, I as Marianne, and this is why I picked Marianne for my sponsor, because she always says, I fell in hate with Alcoholics Anonymous, and I did too. I took inventory at a great rate. I still do this, but I do it less. And I took inventory all the time, and I just knew that nothing was right, and I was figuring out theologically how could this be right, and oh, God help me. And they were basically telling me 5 things in Alcoholics Anonymous, none of which were attractive, I might add. And the first one was, which was weird, and for you newcomers, it was very strange, because I got sober on the 2nd of December 1978, and that was kind of coming close to Christmas. And they were saying, don't drink. Now, if you're told not to drink just before Christmas, when Christmas is one of your legal times for drinking, you'd think it's weird. And I remember telling Jane one day, I said, Jane, well, of course I will be drinking for Christmas. And she said, don't do that if you're new. Don't ever tell anyone stuff like that. And I told her that, and she said, oh, we don't do Christmas today. We do Christmas on the 25th of December. I thought that was the most wonderful piece of truth I ever heard. She said, this is only the 11th. Oh, and I thought, oh, you only do it. That was weird. Anyway, she said, don't drink. I mean, since I do like 3 years down the road now even. And then they said, go to meetings. Now, I didn't think there was anything at all at meetings that would enhance me. Because in my bottom drawer I have pieces of paper that are called degrees, and I thought that I knew all that I'd have to know about anything in this world, especially anything to know about God. And they were telling me to go to meetings, and I just didn't think that meetings had anything to offer me, because you see, I still had this terrible thing called arrogance, where I knew that I just knew a little bit better than everybody else. And somehow, because I was so special, I thought there was some special group, some special way, some special formula that I, Sister B, could get. God help me. You know, folks, as I say this, I say it with great embarrassment, because I almost missed the beauty of this program, the beauty of seeing you here today, because of my arrogance. The reluctance to follow directions, to do it exactly as the program is designed. And then they said, read the book. Now, I don't know if you've ever been told that, but I didn't care to be told to do anything. And so they told me to read the book. And they were telling me everything was in the book. All the answers for me were in the book. So I took the book down to Huntington Beach one day, and I sat up where the lifeguard doesn't sit in December, and I corrected it so that you would all have it, the new edition. I fixed all the sentences up, because English was one of my majors, and I know how to do English. And I, put commas in here and fixed those sentences, God. And I went down to Serenity Hall, and I told them that the syntax in the big book offended my sensibilities. And they just looked at me, and they said, keep coming back. And they said, then you have to try to get a sponsor. Get sponsor. Well, I didn't do sponsors very well. Some of you here know that I did sponsors very poorly in the first couple of years. I used to kind of like interview ladies occasionally, and they were lucky that I got to interview them. And then I would hire them temporarily, and when I didn't care for what they were telling me, I would get rid of them, terminate them. and didn't do well with sponsors at all, because, see, my big problem is that I don't know how to follow directions very well. As a matter of fact, I didn't even do that well yesterday. Somebody wrote down really carefully for me how to get here, and I did the wrong thing. I said, no, this looks better than what's on my piece of paper, so I'll do this. So I got picked up yesterday by a policeman. And I was crying so hard. This is yesterday. I was crying so hard by the time I got I said, oh, God, please don't give me a ticket. Oh, this is the end of the world, you know, when it's the end, capital T, capital E. And he said, where are you going, ma'am? I said, I don't know. And I handed him, you know, the thing. I handed him your big flyer that said where I was going, and he read it. He said, you going to that convention, Bern? Do you know? I said, yeah, I think I am. I'm going there trying to get there. See, and I said, and I couldn't. He says, well, listen. He says, listen to this. Follow directions. So I said, well, I don't know how to do directions real well. So, now, keep coming back if you're new, because it gets better. And so, even yet, when I see, like on the road, right-hand lane must turn right, I say, who said? You know, who said? I don't do directions. So sponsors were supposed to be the people that were telling me directions, and I wasn't going to do directions for anybody. And sometimes you'd hear about these tough sponsors, you know, the ones who are tough. Oh, no way would I ever get those. Oh, my God, no. You know, the ones that say you're going to brush your teeth, that kind. Oh, no. I just couldn't do that at all. And so I was very uncomfortable, and then they would tell me to work the steps. There were the 5 things. Don't drink, go to meetings, read the book, get a sponsor, work the steps. And I was miserable in Alcoholics Anonymous. I used to go to Serenity Hall regularly, and I would cry a lot. I was always crying. As a matter of fact, the fellows there used to call me the crying nun. I cried an awful lot. And one day this fellow came to me after the meeting, and he said to me, B, he says, you're always miserable and you're always uncomfortable. And he said, like, this is a program where, like, we're supposed to be kind of happy, joyous, and free. And I said, well, you could have fooled me, because I don't get that part. And I knew there was a glow and a light and an aura about everybody else, but I knew that I wasn't getting it, like Keith talked about. I knew everybody else was taken into a room of AA someplace, and they were given it. You know that it? That thing. And I couldn't catch on. And I used to go to women's meetings, and there were the kind of women, they always had this glow about them, and they'd sit and they'd crochet Afghans. Oh, God, I hate that. God, I hated it. And they'd smile, and it's okay. And no matter what happened to them, they had the okay syndrome, I used to call it. See, I had a flat tire getting to the meeting, but it was okay. And they had a kind of a ring about okay, and I never felt okay. And this man was telling me, you know, he said, B, this is supposed to make you free inside, and you're supposed to feel okay as a result of this program. And I said, well, the only thing that I'm not drinking, but everything else is crazy. I said, I can't sleep at night. I can't do this thing. I can't get it. Now, I'm quite a few months sober at this time, quite a while. And he said to me, this might work for you. This man has passed away since, and I'll never forget what the legacy he left me. He said, this might work for you. He said, go home to your convent and kneel on your knees and ask God to give you the willingness to change your attitude. Now, with the pieces of paper that I had in my bottom drawer, with all the courses, all the retreats, all the praying, all the exposure that I had to spiritual things, and I had a lot of that exposure, I never heard anybody saying to me, kneel on your knees and ask God to give you the willingness to change your attitude. I just never heard of it. And so I was in such pain. You know, we do things motivated by pain, at least I do. And I went home and I did exactly what the man told me to do. I knelt on my knees, and I was real embarrassed, and I said, God, I don't want to do this. I don't think this is going to work, but I'm going to ask you to give me the willingness to change my attitude. And being as dramatic and histrionic as I like to be, I would love to tell you that God appeared to me, and that there was a burning bush, and there was a rainbow, and there were angels singing in the sky, and God gave me a gift-wrapped package of willingness to do me until I would die. And that's not true. But what I'm here to tell you, that 9 years, 11 months, and 4 days later, that God has given me little pieces of willingness. Now, it's real. I found out a great thing about this thing and willingness. I found out 2 basic things. One is that any time I ever pray for the willingness, anytime I ever pray for the willingness, I always get it. That's weird. That prayer is always answered. The other thing I found out about God is that God is very stingy with willingness. God does not do willingness for Christmas Day. God does not do willingness for next weekend. God just does willingness for today. This is Sunday, and God just does Sundays. That's what I found out. But any time that I kneel down on my knees, and you don't have to do it that way, but that worked for me real well, and ask God to give me the willingness to change. And I get real stuck in the program sometimes. And it's natural for me that I would get stuck because the book says that I'm caught. I'm encased in the bondage of myself. I'm described real well on page 62. And any time that I pray for that willingness, I get to break out of that. And so I started to feel a wee bit better, just a wee bit better. And I got willing to go to more meetings. I got willing to read the book as was written. Can you believe that? And finally, I was able to find myself 2 wonderful sponsors. Some of you know Deacon, some of you know Mary Ann. Well, they have saved my life. They're the most, I hate speakers that get up here and talk about their sponsors, but I have to tell you about mine. They're the most wonderful people. They're so gentle. They're so perceptive. They know not to push me, and they just know. And they say it in such a wonderful way. I'm just so entirely and eternally grateful for these 2 people in my life. And so things started to get better. And I started to find out and to feel what this thing was, this secret was that made it go for all of us. And what I found out was that I had to do this. I had to really personalize what the book says. I had to personalize that, because if I read it out there, I read it for all of you, and I don't do it for me. I'm good at doing that. So what I have to do now is I have to read the book for me. And this is how I have to do that. I have to look at the bottom of page 62 and I have to say, B, this is the how and the why of it. You have to quit playing God because it doesn't work. See, I had no problem with a relationship with God before I came here. I just figured that God was God and that I was Mrs. God, so I was in charge. That's all. No problem. And I would just say, God, come on, do this, write lists, do this. I wrote lists for God. I gave orders to God. God got his marching orders for me every single day. I talked to God. But God was supposed to do it my way. See, that was different from the kind of way I have to pray now. I was taught a new prayer yesterday at our morning meeting, and it says, thy will be done, and I mean it. How about that for a prayer? God. Yeah. Didn't she? Nancy taught us that yesterday at our morning meeting. Thy will be done, and I need it. I mean it. God. New prayers. A prayer I learned in Serenity Hall in Whittier was from a fellow called Jim, and he says, the prayer he prays is, dear God, help me not to believe in my own bullshit. How wonderful. Isn't that great that we can get to hear these wonderful prayers? And I was teaching people how to pray, you know. It's great. And anyway, so I have to read the book like, B, this is the how and the why of it. You have to quit playing God because, B, it doesn't work for you. And hereafter, B, in this drama of life, God is going to be your director. He's going to be in charge. He's going to be your father, and you're going to be his child. And B, guess what? Most good ideas are simple. That's how true. And this concept, B, is the keystone of the new and triumphant arch through which you are going to pass to freedom. Now, I only ever wanted freedom. I never wanted to hurt myself. I never wanted to hurt anybody else. I didn't know. I just didn't know that I had a disease. And the secret, I think, of getting it and the glow and whatever the secret is, seems to be after that time, that when I can get to know that God's in charge. Now, those of you who know me from the early morning meetings that I go to know that I do God being in charge very reluctantly. I love to take over. I love to be in the driver's seat. And I have to get reminded of this all the time. And the top of page 62 says to me, when you sincerely take this position, B, all sorts of remarkable things are going to follow. And then it goes down to promise me 13 remarkable promises on page 63. It promises me unbelievable things like, B, guess what? Less and less you are going to be interested in yourself and in your plans and designs. Now that's a miracle. And more, B, you're going to be interested in what you can contribute to life. I'm very touched by that because I just never knew of any way that I could get to know about this except through this program. Now I'm sure there might be other ways, but this is what the program has worked for me this well. It's so marvelous. And it tells me on page 63 that B, you're going to lose your fear. Any fear that you have, you're going to lose it. You're going to lose your fear of today, and you're going to lose your fear of tomorrow, and you're going to lose your fear of hereafter. And it goes on to promise me through every single one of these steps, it promises me wonderful things. And I've only just kind of discovered this whole business about the promises that are all encased in the steps. I didn't know until fairly recently that there were 13 promises in step 3. I didn't know until recently that there are 5 promises in step 4. Beautiful promise like that those of us who have been into calamity, it says that we'll be able to match calamity with serenity. Isn't that wonderful for us? My life was an entire calamity, like one big calamity. And the step in step 4, it promises me to the extent that I trust this infinite God rather than my finite self, that I'll be able to match calamity with serenity. That's a promise. It also promises me in step 4 that if I ask God to remove my fear and ask him what he would want me to be, that at once, doesn't say now next week or next year or 1990, it says at once B, you are going to begin to outgrow fear. Isn't that marvelous? I'm just fascinated. And I didn't know until fairly recently that there were 10 promises as a result of step 5. 10 beautiful promises on page 75, I think it is. And it goes on to say, our fears fall from us. We can look the world in the eye. What a wonderful promise. We get to look one another in the eye. For those of us who are embarrassed and who had shame and guilt as our MO, and especially somebody like me who felt I should be teaching people how to do life, and I was full of embarrassment and full of shame and full of guilt, and I can get to look the world in the eye as a result of step 5. Isn't that a miracle for us? And the other lovely one in step 5 that I'm really fascinated with, that I get to trip, hand in hand with the spirit of the universe on the broad highway. Isn't that fabulous for us? We get to do all this stuff, and we get to feel it and taste it as we stay close to one another. The promises that are in steps 8 and 9 are the promises that we usually refer to, like on page 84 and 85, like we'll get a new freedom and a new happiness, and we won't regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. And the last one of all of those is my favorite one. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we couldn't do for ourselves. Did you ever have a day where you had a whole bunch of suddenlies? Suddenly realize. A lot of Spanish-speaking people here. I'd like to tell it to you in Spanish. Muy pronto comprenderemos que Dios está haciendo por nosotros lo que no podemos hacer por nosotros mismos. That we know immediately that God's going to do for us what we couldn't do for ourselves. I could get here yesterday. I didn't have to drink over getting lost. I can go to the store. Simple things I can do today that I couldn't do 10 years ago. And I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that I'm doing today what I could never have done for myself, that is God that's doing this for me. I'm very, very touched and fascinated by steps 10, 11, and 12, and all the promises that are in there. Oh, they're wonderful. Step 10 is always interesting to me because I come from the north of Ireland, and step 10 says that we can only have 4 things wrong with us, and those things are selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. And when I'm uncomfortable, it's either one of those or a combination of them that can get me upset. And it tells me exactly what to do. Say, God, please take this away. Please remove it. And God does exactly as I say. When I ask God to remove my defects, he just does that. Now, he doesn't disappear them. I don't know. We have a friend in Anaheim Hills, and he talks about, that our defects of character are kind of like burrowed somewhere, and they pop up every once in a while. You think they're gone, and they're not gone. And this God that I was able to find, I was able to find through step 7, when I finally was able to say and mean, my Creator, I'm now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I found the God that I wished I had, the God that I taught other people about. And my God appeared to me in my psychic self and in my mind that day and said, oh, B, are you sure? Is it okay for you not to be perfect for me? You don't have to be perfect. I love you just as you are. That was a big revelation for somebody like me, because I had spent all my years trying to be perfect for God, doing good things for God. And when I took step 7, I knew the truth of what I had taught everybody else, and that was that, your God loves you so much that he even stores your tears up, and he puts them in a little bottle. I used to find that in the big book, like Keith talked about last night in the Bible. And God loves you so much that he has carved your name on the palm of his hand. But I knew that he had left me out. And when I took step 7, I knew that I was special to God. I knew I was God's kid for the very first time. I found that out through people like you, and I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful to you for teaching me that. But what I discovered in step 10 was that I get to stop fighting. Oh, it's wonderful. It says, and by this time we have stopped fighting everything and everyone, even alcohol, because sanity will have returned. Isn't that marvelous for us? And the promises in that step is that we feel that we're in a position of neutrality. Now, people from the north of Ireland never do neutrality. They always have an opinion on everything. The nice thing that I've learned about that is that I can still hold fast to my own integrity. I can still speak my truth, but I don't have to fight it. It's wonderful. Not to wake up in the morning fighting the whole world all the time. Doesn't mean it's always perfect, but it's marvelous. And that I've been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected, by a father that Keith talked about last night. A father who has a daughter called Kelly. You know the way he described his relationship with Kelly? We have another friend over in Anaheim Hills, and his name is Richard. And Richard brought his little 3-month-old son to the meeting on Friday. We have a book study on Friday. And he sat with his little son in his lap the whole time, and I thought, that's the kind of trust that I have to have in my father. This little baby knew that his dad was not going to drop him, that he was not going to harm him, that he was not going to run away. And my biggest problem is that I don't trust my father. And step 10 tells me that I will be placed in a position safe and protected under the arms of my father. Now that's a miracle for me to know that. Now not to know it only intellectually, but to know it in my gut. Step 11 is about prayer and meditation, and it's filled with promises also. And it gives me exact directives as how to do my day. We read this out loud at our morning meeting, and it says, on awakening, let us think about the 24 hours ahead, and we consider our plans for the day. Now, consider is a very gentle word. It doesn't mean get in there, do it, fix it, do him, do her. Do you ever have problems before you woke up even? They're at the bottom of the bed waiting for you? No, you never had those. Where they're saying, come on, wake up, B, come on, we've got to get so-and-so. Go. The book says consider our plans for the day. And we ask God to direct our thinking. Now, when I ask God to direct my thinking, my God says, whoops, we've got to do B's thinking. That's a big job, B's head gets very scrambled up. And we ask God to take away, to divorce it from all the things that would obstruct us, that would clutter us. And then it goes on to promise the most marvelous things. What used to be the hunch or the occasional inspiration gradually becomes a working part of the mind. I found that work in my profession. I work with nuns and priests and bishops all day long. And it's marvelous to me how my hunches and what I used to think was the occasional inspiration gradually has become the working part of my mind. And the way I know that is because they think I'm brilliant. They think I'm brilliant because I can say things to them like at a big executive meeting. I say, well, we don't have to do it all today. We can just do this a day at a time. And they say, oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's a good idea. I pulled a real good one recently from the 12 and 12. Well, I use it a lot. I think I found it recently, in the last couple of years anyhow, from the 12 and 12, where it talks about gossip barbed with her anger is a polite form of murder by character assassination. That's a marvelous quote. And I was given this workshop on communications, and this little Monsignor in the back of the room said, Sister, could you repeat that again? He's writing it down. He said, where'd you get that? And I thought, oh, well, I just pick these things up as I go along. What I'm telling you, though, is, and I sincerely mean this, that this program equips us to do everything we ever have to do. I was invited to Australia earlier this year to give a whole seminar, totally unrelated to Alcoholics Anonymous. The entire seminar was on the 12 steps, but they didn't know that. Every day we said what we call the prayer of abandonment, and it went like this: God, I offer myself to Thee to build with me and to do with me as Thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self. They all asked me to write it down. They took copies of it. They're all saying it for their morning prayer in Australia. My Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me. It's marvelous. It's fabulous. And they've invited me to do this. Last weekend, I got a new job in my community recently, and that means I'm in charge of them all again. And so I had my first regional assembly last weekend, or the weekend before. And for the whole day that we had, the whole process was called Living in the Solution. And they said to me, oh, that's a wonderful title. Everybody came. There's 100% attendance. That's the first time that everybody ever came. Everybody came. And for the process little discussion thing we had, out of page 449, acceptance is the answer to all of my problems today. When I'm disturbed, it is because some person, place, or thing, or event is, and I have to look at me and all that stuff that Dr. Paul wrote. So we use that for our process. And everybody was saying, where did you get this material? I said, oh, I picked it up, go around the world. I had phone calls and letters and bouquets of flowers from my own nuns, that I'm doing my own nunny bunnies now, and telling me how wonderful I am. Now see, that's the program, folks. That's the program. It equips us to do anything we'll ever do. Even the policeman yesterday equips us to do everything we ever have to do. And it's marvelous, and I wish I knew how it worked, but I don't know how it works. I just know it does. I'm so grateful. I'm so terribly grateful. I know that we all get to participate in Step 12. We all do. The Step 12 work that has gone on through the preparation of this convention is phenomenal to me. Can you imagine what it's going to be like 2 or 3 years from now? If it's like this now. This is fabulous. You get to carry the message by doing ashtrays, by setting up chairs, by giving somebody a cup of coffee, and I'm totally convinced that it's not the speakers necessarily. It's the atmosphere here that gets the message carried, that generates the love and the enthusiasm and the purposefulness of this marvelous program. God, I wish I could stay with you all day. And I wish that, and I wish for you people who are new, I hope you'll stay. Please do, as our friend Carmen over Pomona says, don't go away before the miracle happens. Stay around, because the miracle is here for all of us. And in closing, I would like to say to you that I'm very touched by the fact that you invited me to be here at your first convention. I am extremely grateful to many, many of you personally for the way you have helped me to work the steps and to keep the traditions. I'm very grateful for the 2 wonderful people that I got to share a meal with last night. On my right was a fellow called Steve, and he shared God with me. And on my left was this wonderful gentleman over here, Jack, who shared God with me. And it makes no difference how God gets shared. And it's always fascinating to me. And in closing, I would say to you, and I say to me especially, see to it that your relationship with Him is right. And great events will come to pass for you and countless others. That is the great fact for us. May God bless you, and I love you.